Hey, just getting this going on Facebook and YouTube simultaneously. Bear with me. This is a ton of open studio. You can send mixes in for live feedback every night, 6 p.m. Eastern. I was camping the last couple of days, so I wasn't here. Good to see everybody again. Going to go ahead and take a couple of minutes and just let people get in here. And if you are not familiar, you can just send tracks to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. I'll take a listen to them and, see what's going on in your mix. And how we're running it is anything that comes in before 6 p.m., I will, dial in and take a look at. And then once we're out of tracks, anything that comes in while I'm looking at those original tracks, we'll also take a look at. But then once we're out of tracks, we'll go ahead, call it a night. That way, if you're watching this on replay, you'll know that from beginning to end, it's just pure audio content. So I have a track from David, and we're going to talk about loudness. That's going to be super fun. And then I've got some stuff from Scarholm. They're remixes, so can't play them on the stream, but I'll go ahead and mute the stream and still take a listen. So we'll go ahead and dial those in. So I'm going to go ahead and grab David's track. I got to find it. Here we go. Downloading. So we've got Scarholm. David's track. David, once you're here, go ahead and give a shout out in the chat. Oh, cool. We can play it on the stream. That's awesome. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this remix. All right. Okay, let's take a listen and see what we got. And just talking over it a little bit. And one more safety tag. Very cool. So, yeah, you were mentioning in the email that you were, taking a lot of things into consideration that we've been talking about for the last week. And it definitely sounds like you have. There's a lot of great stuff happening here. Really, to dial it in, I think you're about 3/4 of the way on the separation between bass and kick. It's like, I would even say that it is good enough, but I think that you could dial back a little bit of bass, just frequency wise, maybe in the 30 to 70 region, just dip it down like another half to 1.5 dB, because it is separated, but I feel like there's a little more room, and then it would really get that low end totally dialed in. But as of now, like we're going into taste at this point. This is what I would do to taste. But I think, it's good enough, maybe a little more. I feel like, let me... Okay, backbeat. Backbeat could get snappier and punchier. And it doesn't sound... Let me see what happens. You don't really have a traditional snare in there. I think that there is one. It's just very low in the mix. And that's fine. Like there's like a snap, and then there's like a big guitar backbeat. And like not everything has to have like a big like boom cha like big snare, but there should be impact on the backbeat. So without necessarily reaching for like a big heavy industrial snare, I would take the backbeat elements that you have. There's like maybe a little clap thing, there's a little bit of shimmer, and just push those in the areas of the frequency spectrum that like a big snare would occupy. And I'm talking about 200 hertz and like 1.5K, 2K, 3K, kind of around there. So just those like backbeat parts of the frequency spectrum, I think that you could fill out, and then it would groove a little bit better, and it would feel a little bit bigger. So yeah, address your backbeat. The other thing that kind of leads into, you've got a really nice like top end, like above 8K. It's nice. Okay, cool. I just saw your chat. Yeah, so you've got a snap, clap, and a low volume snare. You don't have to like bring the snare volume up, just bring up that frequency stuff on the clap, the snare, and the snap, rather than the entire volume of those things. And that just ties in, like, everything above 8K, that looks good. Everything below, like, 1.5K looks good. You're just a little bit scooped from 1K to 8K. So this is a perfect opportunity to just just gently boost, like, a dB on the clap, a dB on that snare, a dB, a dB here and there. And then, like, yeah, maybe a dB here or there on that vocal. I mean, I think that taste-wise, like, that could be where it is. Like, the whisper vocal thing is popular, like, people do it. So I would I wouldn't necessarily, but if you wanted to add some beef to the vocal, throw an 1176 at it, maybe do some parallel compression, and you could just like beef it up that way. But I wasn't even noticing that as like a horrible thing. It felt kind of like to taste. But yeah, so 1 to 8K, spice it up with just, throw in some info in some of those backbeat elements, maybe in the vocal. But that's all very good. It sounds good. It feels good. I like what's happening here. Just last off, you are pushing loudness just a little bit. I would just back off your limiter like 1 dB. You're crunching it a little bit too hard as it is right now, and maybe this is like a rough limiter, but you're like on target. Just like back it off 1 notch, and then you're there. Okay. I love what's happening. I love seeing. This is big progress in a lot of ways from some of the other stuff that I was hearing. It's just a lot less scooped. There's a lot more. It's way more like even-handed, and it feels good. So cool, great track, really cool to listen to. I'm gonna go ahead and this is a ton of open studio. We've got some people watching. This is nightly mixed feedback at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Every night of the week, except for the last couple of nights I was camping, and I forgot to tell everyone before I left. So I am back. We'll be here. The protocol is you can send tracks to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. That link is in the description. And send it in. Put Open Studio somewhere in the subject line so I know that's what it's for. And I'll take a listen and dial in some mix feedback so that you can get it just, a little bit bigger, a little bit punchier, a little bit cleaner, anything you need. So I start the show at 6, and I've got a couple more tracks to listen to. And if something else comes in while I'm listening to it, awesome. I will put it in the rotation. And if not, we're just going to call the stream call it a night. And then you'll know if you watch the repeat the next day that it's just track feedback from beginning to end. All right. And before I get to David's track, I'll go ahead and do the whole promotion part of this. So first off, like, comment, and subscribe. Share this link around so that we get more tracks to listen to and, more fun stuff like that. And then I have the Patreon shout out. There's a Patreon link in the description to keep this thing going. There's also like one-on-one coaching and stuff available. It's cool. And there's also the Patreon shout out where I put this slide up and say, thanks, Demeter, and thanks, Mason. Y'all are awesome. Nightly shout out. Thank you very much. All right, let's hone in on David's track. And I'm just going to take a look at this email. Okay, so you've got a master for Breach, which we've been calling Baseline 2 for the last week. And you want it to be in your face, but you don't want it to be absolutely smashed. That's a great place to be because that is where we want stuff to be. That's awesome. It's gonna be the first song under your new alias. Super cool. And also you were asking, you've posted your remix of the Billie Eilish tune, which we've been listening on mute on the stream. So go ahead and post that in the chat and absolutely anywhere. Everyone should listen to it because it's sweet. Feel free to do that. Now, you're talking about Loudness Penalty, which is a good thing. Like, it's a good thing to know that that exists, okay? So Spotify and YouTube and Pandora and Tidal and all of the streaming services, they have like a uniform normalization that every single track conforms to once it goes on. Now, let me just double check, because I think that the Spotify normalization is actually an option that the user checks. So hold on one second. Yeah, so there is a user option to turn off Spotify normalization. So technically, the loudness penalty, like this is how neurotic we're getting, because if the user wants to hear the like original loudness that you've dialed in, they have that option. Okay, so that's a thing to consider, but that also counts on the user knowing that that's even an option. Okay. Yeah, and I'm reading the chat now, and we're on this weird delay, so that always throws me off a little bit. But loudness penalty occurs because Spotify does like this universal normalization, which technically the user can bypass. So that's a thing, but it's not like that big of a deal, the loudness penalty, because it's a very non-destructive thing that Spotify does. Like, just turns it down. It's not doing anything weird to your track, so you won't get like a big decrease in sound quality or like funky compression or stuff. They just turn it down. Where you run into trouble on streaming services is when you crush your dynamic range. There is that is when Spotify employs like this weird compression and like loudness adjustment, expanding gate thing, and it like does destructive things to your file that you can't predict. There are all of these rules about, if you go to the Spotify page, they're like, have your limiter set to -1 dB, which is like not industry standard. It's generally like -0.1, -0.2, but they're calling for -1. And if you cross that threshold, they just turn it down. Like, it's not gonna destroy your track. And then they also call for like an integrated LUFS. And once again, if you cross that threshold, then they won't really do anything. But it's your dynamic range that will trip the robot sensor on Spotify, and it'll start doing weird stuff to your track. So that's what we want to look for. You also asked in the email, like, do you do separate masters for streaming and CD and vinyl and blah, blah, blah? And the short answer is no. You want to dial in a master that will sound like it's the master, and it will be universally good. And there is a series of targets that you can hit where your master is going to sound good on vinyl, CD. Now, you do have to do a separate 16-bit dithered CD thing, but sometimes if you're using like a disc reproduction factory, they do that on their end, and then you can just give them your original 24-bit master. Sometimes you have to ask your mastering engineer for a 16-bit master, but the only difference between the 24-bit and the 16-bit master is that it's 16-bit. There's no adjustments to compression or loudness or EQ. It's same. So you can make an agnostic master that goes streaming, vinyl, CD, tape, everything. And I like those masters the most. They generally sound the best on all of those platforms, and it's really a no compromise master. It has like really nice dynamic range. It has all of its, like, there's no clipping. It's not super squashed to death. It'll sound good. everywhere. And the basic targets to hit that, first off, there's some frequency stuff. Like you got to mono your bass below 100, 150, and that's a vinyl thing because the plate just won't handle it. Like it'll mess up, and the lathe will cut weird, and it just won't physically reproduce. So you can technically have a bunch of stereo information in your sub on a digital master, but I would argue that it sounds bad. So you just do it, and it sounds better, and it will also work digitally and on vinyl. So that's one of the things. Then the other thing is too much S content, SE stuff, is gonna ruin a vinyl record. Like it'll physically damage the needle and the plate and all that stuff. Like a bunch of mechanical things will go wrong if your recording is too SE on a vinyl release. So technically your digital master could be crazy SE, and it could just be going and it would totally work. It could be nothing but 5K, and it would work digitally, but it would sound bad. So we have to DS. We have to DS a vinyl master, but we kind of have to DS a digital master too. Maybe there is a little bit more that we could do with, we could, I don't know. It's like a good place to be. We just want our 5K to be under control. So the low end stuff and the high end stuff that are mechanically required for an analog master, I would argue are the proper thing to do on a digital release as well. So those things nipped in the bud. Then loudness, we can hit a really nice average loudness on a record and digitally. And what I'm looking for there is and I like to use just RMS as opposed to LUFS. LUFS is like an integrated frequency weighted volume response, and you'll technically know a little more, but RMS meter in combination with a frequency reader will give you the same basic output, and you also get a little more information from moment to moment when you're watching RMS. So that's my personal preference when mastering. I understand why LUFS is used because it's kind of like two birds with one stone, but I also like to have just a separate I balance out my frequency response, and then I balance out loudness, and I know that I'm going to get the result that I want. And that's just like a workflow thing. So after I've dialed in a pretty flat frequency response with a little bit of bass and a little bit of high end, then I know that my RMS and my dynamic range will be accurate. So that's metering stuff. So what I'm looking for is -9 RMS, between -9 and -8 at the loudest sections of the piece, and then a nice healthy dynamic range DR7. And that will be loud, punchy, in your face, competitive, all of those things. It will work on vinyl. It will also work streaming. Agnostic. So that was a really, really long rant about loudness. If you have any questions, you can totally ask. There's a lot. It is both a lot and a little, because it's basically yeah, like DR7 and -9 RMS at its peaks, -9, -8. And that's it. So, snooze, you could totally send tracks. And let me just... Okay, cool. You sent me stuff, so I will get to you right after David. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to take a listen. David sent 2 versions. So I'm going to kind of like play through them and also just flip back and forth between them. Okay, so first off, right off the bat, Master 1 is better than Master 2 because there's a weird pumping on Master 2. So you might have set the compressor a little hard. Your threshold might be too low. Yeah, so I'll just, right off the bat, 1 is better than 2 for that reason. But let me see what else is going on. Yeah, I mean, this is pretty close, okay? And I see in the chat, there's some discussion like, did he use a mastering engineer? Like, I am a mastering engineer, and I do it all day, most days of the week. But I would still say that you could totally master your own stuff. Like, if you are, if you're on a budget money's tight, and you need to get like a slamming track out to make your life better, then you could do it. Um, the yeah, just like be careful, watch what you're doing. Could someone do more with it? Yeah, probably, but like not that much. Like this is very good. This is a great track, and that's what matters. And it's a really good mix. Like that is the important thing. Your master is totally determined by how good your mix is. Like the best mastering engineer in the world, if you gave them a bad mix, it's still, they wouldn't make like an amazing thing with it. It's totally dependent on the mix. And the greatest mastering engineer in the world would listen to that mix and go, you need to fix your mix. Here's what you need to do, and give a bunch of notes. Like mastering isn't just about like magically hitting the compressor the right way and like the EQ. Like that is part of it. Like, like it needs 1.5 dB at 150. Oh, it's much better. That's like one of the things. But the most important thing is quality control. I listen to it and go, hey, your snare needs more life at 1.5K. Send it back. So yes, has to be a good mix. So here's what's up. This is a good master. It could be louder. Okay. Like you have the best problem in the world. You could hit it a little bit harder. First off, it looks like you're limiting true peaks to -1, because Spotify told you to. Okay. There's like a mastering for musicians Spotify sheet, and they're like true peaks at -1. Do -0.1. That's what I do, and I have a whole like super nerd group of mastering engineers that I talk to like every day, and we're all doing -0.1, and no one's reporting like weird stuff on their Spotify output. So yeah, -0.1, totally fine. Do that. So that's going to give you a little more oomph right off the bat. And then you're at like -11 RMS on the biggest parts of the track. Take it up to -9. Okay. So just push your like compressor gain, bring it up 2 dB or so into your limiter, and you should be good. And that's going to do the other thing. Your dynamic range. You're at DR9. It could be DR7. So basically, you've got a little. You could so take that ceiling up, and then push your compressor up a little bit, and then you're done. Yep, hit the limiter harder, and you're good to go. Like everything is so well balanced. Your bass and your kick, they're just like so much of this like loudness control is actually frequency response. Like once you dial in a really nice EQ, then you have your EQ determines your loudness more than your final compression limiting, because that's like your compressor and your limiter. That's kind of like robotic, like automatic stuff. Like, oh, it just needs to hit this average loudness. But how it's going to be perceived by the audience is going to be more determined by your frequency response. And you've done a really good mix. It's really balanced, and it has a lot of nice presence. So it's going to feel loud to the listener. So bump it up, beef it up a little bit, and you're good to go. I think that answers all of your questions. And also, like, yeah, you're like 2 dB away from being done with this track. And definitely drop the link when it's done and everyone can listen to it. So great work. I'm going to go ahead and Snooze sent some stuff. Snooze is news. Say hi to Snooze. Good to have you. We got 2 phones, 2 steps. All right, so let's take a listen.
Two steps, whose moves, what's next? Too much, too less, bad bitch, undress, do more, do less, too cool, clueless, bad bitch, blue dress, fat blunts, smoke sesh. If you all alone then you can go and smoke the diss. Let them run their mouth and let them go and talk their shit. I'd rather run away with the papers and the bitch. They'd rather run away with their problems and that shit. Don't know where you're going, but you gotta go somewhere. If it ain't here, then you go better find a place there. If it ain't there, then you better leave a spot here. No rush, we drop a little blood, leaving no tears. 2 phones, 2 steps, whose moves, what's next? Too much, too less, bad bitch, undress, do more, do less, too cool, clueless, bad bitch, blue dress, fat blunts, smoke sesh. If you all alone, then you can go and smoke the diss. Ayaw lang pagsabak kay na whoops, whoops. Feeling like I'm Curry outside when I shoot hoops. Daghan mga police do crimes, wanna shoot. Okay, I don't really hate them though. We just tryna make the greens, cause that's how the world goes. Sipping on some iced tea, and that shit be hella cold. Sipping on some Bali, like that shit is all I know. Okay, I'm a baby taking 2 steps. Keep the circle tight for a better, cleaner smoke set. Saying that I'm greedy, then they better get their own shit. If you got what you got, you go better on it.
Okay. I love a nice dusty boom bap feel, and that delivered. So you're doing the thing. You're absolutely on the path to making the thing. Like, you have a vision and you have executed it, and it is happening. So that's like right off the bat, there you go. I'm going to say that first things first, you're clipping. So you're going to have to dial everything back and get your gain staging figured out. Like, that is the very, very first thing that I would address on this mix is the master is clipping, and I'm hearing stuff clipping internally. Stuff is clipping. So manage your gain from plugin to plugin, from track to track, going into your master fader. Like, if you have a limiter and you're mixing with a limiter and you turn it off and everything blows up and you're seeing a bunch of red lights, that means that you have problems baked into your track. And I am vaguely afraid that that is the case on this mix. So basically, to engage in like gain staging discipline, you're going to need to utilize like gain plugins. I'll ask in the chat, but I'm going to ask what DAW you're using. Snooze 1, are you using? Direct questions work better in the chat because otherwise I'm on a delay and it's like I'm talking into nothing and then I'm waiting. So any DAW has some sort of built-in gain tool, and you just need to manage your gain from the beginning to the end. So like your input gain, that's going to exist somewhere in your DAW on track to track. Reaper. Okay, Reaper's great. I don't use Reaper very often at all, but I've definitely opened it up. But, you know, totally great DAW. I'm sure that they have a gain plugin, so find it and use it. So you're going to have to manage your input gain, make sure that you're not clipping your track. And then from plugin to plugin to plugin to plugin, as you're adding plugins on your track, make sure that you're not clipping the plugin. Like if you're adding gain with a compressor, make sure that that's not clipping your EQ that you're putting after it. So watch out for that. Bust everything out, and then do your bus processing. Pop a mix tool or a gain plugin at the end of your bus processing and control your gain going into your master fader. And if you just get this dialed in, this workflow, this discipline, then you're going to get a better mix. And watch out for that. So like right off the bat, clipping. Watch out for that clipping. Watch out for your gain. Like I could, you know, we're a little clippy sausage right here. I could see it before I heard it. So first off that. Now, you have a pretty decent frequency response happening. Let's go ahead. It's it's a little bit dull, but I mean, I think you also sent an MP3, so no, it is a wave. All right, so you are pretty much dropping off around 15K. So there's just room to just brighten everything up a little bit and toss some air at your cymbals and stuff. And it's just going to open up the soundstage and feel a little bit wider. Like you're definitely going for like a boom bap, lo-fi feel, but to make it competitive on a modern playlist and everything, just throw some sparkle into your hats. So above 15K could just get a little bit spicier on the whole mix. Let me listen to kick and bass.
Let them run their mouth and let them go and talk their shit. I'd rather run away with the papers and the bitch. They'd rather run away with their problems and that shit. Don't know where you're going, but you gotta go somewhere. If it ain't here.
Okay, actually really good control of kick and bass. You've got a lot of snare in the sub. I would maybe clean up your snare just a little bit. Scoop out like some 60 on that snare. It's just fighting. It's fighting a little bit with your kick, and that's just gonna help clear those two up. Bass is like non-existent in the sub. Like, and part of me that's like a control freak is like, yeah, keep it just for the kick. But I think that
rather run away with the papers and the bitch. They rather run away with their problems and that shit.
Yeah, I like never give this advice, but I think you could throw some more bass into the below 100 range. Like your kick is probably a little bit too boofy. Like it seems to have a fundamental that stretches from 30 hertz to like all the way up to 100, and carve out like from 70 hertz to 100 hertz, take out like 4 dB on the kick, and then counterbalance that with bass. And I think you're going to have an even better low end. Like you're already like nice and controlled down low, so you have room to push it a little bit. So that's awesome. Great problem to have. And yeah, carve out the snare and let the bass live there instead. And then we're just going to have a little bit smoother low end experience. Let's see, listening again.
If it ain't here, then you go better find a place there. If it ain't there, then you better leave a spot here. No rush, we drop a little blood, leaving no tears. 2 phones, 2 steps, whose moves, what's next? Too much, too less, bad bitch, undress. Do more, do less, too cool, clueless. Bad bitch, blue dress, fat blunts, smoke sesh. If you all alone, then you can go and smoke the diss. Ayaw lang pagsabak and I whoops, whoops. Feeling like I'm Curry outside.
Yeah, lots of good stuff happening here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to pull up a visual aid. So we have some peaks and valleys in the whole thing. And if you just focused on smoothing out this overall thing, you know, big dip at 250, big spike at 125 or 110, big dip at 3K, 2.7K rather, and then this big drop off that I was talking about. So, oh, and you've also got lots of just like flubby mud below 30. So you're going to want to high pass that out on your stuff because it's a bit flubby, and you'll get more loudness, you'll get more control if you just get a little more aggressive with your high pass on like maybe your kick or bass. Hard to say what is down there, but yeah, be a little more aggressive with that high pass. So we're just kind of a little bit and if we loaded in like a like pro track, what you're gonna see is like a pretty flat from like 125 to 8K, sometimes all the way up to 20K, just totally flat, with like a little bump at 60 and maybe a little bump at 16K. But you know, a lot of the like radio hits are like pretty flat frequency response wise. Sometimes like a rock track is gonna have like a little bit of a bump at like 500 to 1K or 2K. That's like on a rock track where we want it to sound warm or something like that, and that's a little bit blown up in that region. I also see that a lot on like, you know, mid 2000s like metal screamo stuff that's gonna have like or like Circa Survive and like that kind of like tech operatic metal stuff like that. That's a little bit bumpy in the mids, and yeah, so we're just kind of like all over the place. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask in the chat, what are you using, monitors or headphones? But, you know, all this said, I really like the track and I like what's happening. Like, you have the nice, so like drum samples are great, like really good choice. That like sparkly Rhodes is really nice. It's a collection of nice sounds that just need to get managed a little bit more aggressively.
No rush, we drop a little blood, leaving no tears. 2 phones, 2 steps, whose moves, what's next?
Yeah, so the snare and the hi-hat are kind of occupying the same frequency range. So if you threw that hi-hat higher into like that like above 15K region, then you're going to get separation on that snare and that hi-hat. The snare will feel a little bit snarier. The hi-hat will feel a little bit sparklier.
Too much, too less, bad bitch, undress, do more, do less, too...
Yeah, because they're happening at the same time, so we want to separate them out in frequency world. Okay, cool. So you're using monitors and headphones, and let's all right, and for anyone who can't see the chat, I am asking if there's any acoustic treatment in this room. Now, the vocals,
Fat blunts, smoke sesh. If you all alone and you can go and smoke the dish. Ayaw lang pagsabak and I whoops whoops. Feeling like I'm Curry outside when I shoot hoops. Daghan mga police do crimes, wanna shoot.
okay, so your vocals, I like what's happening. Like you've got like a nice like phasey tape thing, and they're good. You know, like they work, and I can understand everything, and they're sitting generally nicely in the mix. But so like I'm talking about like frequency response and like all of this stuff, and this is gonna feed into like how are those vocals gonna sound better, because if you control your frequency response, you're going to have an easier time balancing the vocals and getting like a better vocal sound. As of this moment, everything is a little bit too kind of cramped, and we've got these kind of like vaguely out of control, like uneven frequency responses. So it's going to be, you're basically fighting your room at this point, where to like dial in like, oh yeah, we could get a little more on those vocals here and there. It's hard to say at this point because everything is just a little bit cramped, because like your bass is living up into where the vocals could maybe live, because your kick is occupying the entirety below 100. So if you scooted your bass down to occupy like a lower range, then your vocals are going to be able to, because like, I don't know, like right off the top of my head, vocals are maybe a little thin.
Fat blunts, smoke sesh. If you all alone and you can go and smoke.
Okay, but I wouldn't necessarily say boost your vocals at 200, because maybe if you just scooted the bass out of the way and brought your bass lower and got that low end under control, then the vocals are going to feel more present because there'll be less masking. So everything just needs to kind of like, so like this frequency response, if it just got like pulled out, okay, and kind of like stretched out, and the high end got pushed further and the low end got pushed further, then there's going to be it's going to be easier to imagine where the vocals actually need to sit, because right now everyone is kind of piling on top of each other, and that's the nature of the mix at this moment. So yeah, I mean, as far as like an initial response, vocals could have more like body and chest sound and feel more powerful. And I mean, I could tell you like you could use parallel compression, and you could use like a little like saturation and a parallel aux and like all that. And like, yeah, those are all things that you could do. But first things first, clear space, and then maybe you don't have to do like a trick. Maybe it'll just sound better. So I mean, the overall diagnosis on this mix is like stuff is just a little bit piled on top of each other. So a little more aggressive EQ. So I asked about acoustic treatment because this is what I ask everyone, because I think that this is a good mix. There's like that clipping thing, and that is bad. But other than that, this is like a good mix. I can hear every single instrument. I can hear your vocals clearly. I can hear the kick. I can hear the bass. I can hear everything. So I consider that a good mix. Like, it is mixed well in that I can clearly delineate everybody from each other. Okay? So whenever somebody sends something, either on this show or if I'm mastering their album or if I'm remixing it, and if I have like a good sense of space and a good sense of where all the instruments are and like what the instruments are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then I'm like, oh, this is a good mix. When it's a good mix, but it's all funky frequency wise, where there's just like huge buildups at like 110 and like these weird spikes, 110, 300. Those are like classic like room mode buildups or deficiencies. So because you've done a good mix, but your frequency stuff is just all over the place, then my natural assumption is that you are not in a great room. Okay? And that is what you got to dial in. If you're not fighting your room when you're mixing, if your room isn't lying to you, I guarantee you that the next mix you do is going to be 100 times better. Because, once again, this is a good mix. All the instruments are nice. It's all laid out. But it is bad frequency stuff. So, what I would recommend is absolute cheapest thing to do is set up an RFZ, a reflection-free zone. So we're talking about like getting like don't cheap out and get like foam or whatever. Save up as long as you need to, as much as you need to get something like a firm broadband. Like the cheapest that'll do it is Prime Acoustic. I use it for my RFZ because it does the job. Or you could build your own, but then you have to like spend. I built my own like broadbands in the back, but the RFZ are just these Prime Acoustic panels. And to do an RFZ in a small room or whatever, I think it's like $150. Okay. And what you do is these panels, it's like, here's my speaker, okay? Panel, and so that's like just running right next to the speaker. And then everywhere between speaker and my ear has a panel. And it's on both sides of the room. So that's just going to get rid of like all of this reflective stuff between the speakers and me. And that is going to do the absolute most for your mixes. After an RFZ gets dialed in, then you're going to want to do like bass traps along the front walls, a cloud above your head, and then just bass trap, bass trap, bass trap, bass trap, bass trap, bass trap, bass trap everywhere. But that's long term. In the immediate now, it's all about that RFC. So, yeah, as far as like, and you know, pillow behind your mic to record the vocals, sure, that's not really the problem that I'm hearing. Like the room, like dialing in like a nice acoustic space to record is much more involved than dialing in a nice acoustic place to mix. And you can combat room issues easier if you can hear the room issues in your mix. That said, if you're recording and mixing in the same room and you set up an RFZ, that is going to do way more for you about getting like a nice clean vocal recording than like setting up like a pillow. Because when you put like just something in front of the mic, then you're dealing with like something that's going to slap back from the wall and then hit the mic again, and then your head's there. It's kind of, it's really diminishing returns if you're just like addressing, you know, they make like the vocal shield and all that. spend your money elsewhere. You're going to, like, you'll get way better results out of your vocal mic if you start treating your listening environment. And you could kind of do two at the same time. So, if you're set up where you're going to be tracking like next to your speakers, and you set up an RFZ right there, then you're going to have room treatment around your mic. Your vocals will sound better. They'll sound cleaner. As of right now, I think that they sound fine. They're probably weak in the low end, which could be because I'm seeing these big spikes at like 300, which is where we could pull some chest out of your vocal. And it's like, it's so blown up in your mix. I'm wondering if the room is eating 300. So then your vocal is maybe getting a big dip at 300 as it hits the mic. So, dialing in your room is the number one most important thing to do to get like a solid mix, a solid recording, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, like, cool track, really good mix. Clipping, frequency stuff. Address your room. And that's going to like answer all of those questions. Cool. So if you are watching and just dropping by, this is Atonuv Open Studio. If you want to, you can send a track to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. I'll take a look at it. I am out of tracks as of this moment, so we're going to keep on maybe discussing some of the other tracks that we have so far. If you want to send something, send it now, and I will get to it tonight. If something doesn't come in the next little bit, then we're going to call it a night and move on. So, like, comment, subscribe, share the link around so that we can get even more tracks in. There was a little bit of stuff on the chat about not hearing bass on David's track on like a portable speaker. So I'm going to listen to it again, and then we're going to talk about that. So going back to Breach. Okay. So this is like an interesting philosophical discussion. So could there be a lack of perceived bass on a portable speaker? Yeah, probably. But like, lots of stuff has lack of bass on portable speakers. Lack of bass on a phone. You could reference a track that you want to hit on your phone, to feel like, oh, am I getting that like fake bass response at like 150, 200? That's kind of where it's going to live on a like portable speaker. Can you aim for it? Yeah, absolutely. Is that what we want to do necessarily? Debatable, because we're crossing into like, where do we want people to listen to this track? Okay. If you make too many compromises on your low end to accommodate speakers that are just frankly not built for it, then you might be making too many compromises. Okay. So first off, there's that. Like, we always have to take that into consideration, because that is something that we need to consider. Yes, and once again, we're on a delay, but David just said it's not ideal to master for each and every system. Yes. What you want to do is do like an agnostic master, okay? Once again. So some stuff, even some great stuff that's wonderful, is going to sound horrible on like a given system. Like, you have that risk. It could wind up on this specific person's iPhone 4. It's not going to cut it. But we want to accommodate a large scale view that's going to accommodate most things. And the good news is, and it's going to depend not just on the speaker, but also the room and the listening environment, because a given room, if it hasn't been treated, it could have a null at like 125. Okay. And like if you do a frequency reading of like every single room in your house, you're going to get crazy results. Maybe I'll do that, because I've done it a little bit. I've gone into a bunch of rooms in my house, but maybe I'll do it again and like post a video. But room to room in the average like house, it's insane how different every single room is. We're talking about like 12 dB nulls, like in the low mids. If the room hasn't been treated, stuff that when you like start to actually like train your ears to like find details, it'll drive you insane. And like, that's why like I have this room and it is tuned to plus or minus 3 dB flat, which is like insane level of neuroticism to tune it. Plus minus 6 is considered great. So I listen to everything in here. I make all of my decisions in here, and I know this room, and I know that it's flat. And I know exactly, like, if I move a piece of furniture, I can hear it. Like, it's that just insane, okay? But all of the rooms in my house, we're talking about 12 dB nulls, like, in that, like, crucial range. So if your listening environment hasn't been treated and you don't know that it's flat, you can't make judgment calls on like, oh, the bass needs to be more in this thing, because like on David's track, the bass is really nice. Like plenty of bass from 125 up to 200. Which is like where you would aim for bass to like hit a given system. But it's like its harmonic there, not its fundamental, because its fundamental is lower, is at 165. So in a given room, you could have a 6 to 24 dB null at 165. So if someone is listening on a system that doesn't put out sub information, and they're listening to David's track, and their room happens to have a null at 165, then they're going to be like, where's the bass? So there's no way to mix or master to accommodate like every situation like that, because then you would have to have, it's just literally impossible. So what you want to do is you want to, have it nice and flat, have it pretty balanced out, and you're gonna be able to get the most out of that mix and that master. And will it be perfect on every single system? No. Are you necessarily gonna have trouble on every single small speaker. No, let's even, and so like one of the things that I do is like after I've done a master, because I'm crazy, I'll load it onto my phone and I'll just walk through every single room in my house. And I'll note like how it changes and stuff like that. I'm gonna take it from room to room to room to room. But not to make decisions, just to listen for curiosity. Because if I'm making decisions based on those results, then I'm not doing science because there's too many variables, is the point. The decisions are made in the flat room, in this room that I know how something should sound. So if you're wondering, it sounds good in here. Like, I wouldn't think of it as a problem. So let's pull up for fun. And in this room, let's see how that master sounds on my phone.
There is a meaning buried within the sound. Like a dream filling the sky while sleeping.
Yeah, your bass is good. So, yeah, your bass is good. If you wanted to do anything frequency-wise, you could add a little at 200, like a little, 1 dB. That would be like, okay, if I was mastering your track, okay, my move would be like 1 dB at 200 boosted and like 1 dB at 4 or 5K. That's where I would go. And I would use like a 2BQ and like do the thing. Like that's how I would master your track at this point. I wouldn't address the mix. I would consider this to be like a good mix. And if I was mastering it, I would go and like tilt up 200, tilt up 5K. And then I would call it a day. Yeah. So your mix is good. So what I would address is Scarholm, you probably have a null in your room at like 150. Somewhere at 110 to 150. And an RFZ would probably take care of that, and like maybe one big bass trap. But you know, that's fine. So yeah, your track is good. Everyone's tracks are good. This is great. So if you are watching, this is a ton of Open Studio. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can send tracks to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. I'm here every night. I am probably going to go camp again this weekend. I'll make sure to let everyone know the day before this time instead of just disappearing for 2 days. Send stuff, and I will get to it on the next show. And, you know, like, comment, and subscribe, and share this link around, because the more people that we have sending stuff in, the more issues come up, and then we all learn more stuff together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you so much. I am going to call it a night.